Elijah learned early that the world noticed him before it knew him. Before his name could leave his mouth, before his intentions could take shape, before his heart had a chance to speak, his skin spoke for him. Dark. Too dark, some whispered. Dangerous looking, others decided in silence. Elijah was only a child when he realized that people didn't look at him the way they looked at others. Their eyes paused, measured, judged. He grew up in a neighborhood where cracked sidewalks told stories of neglect and where hope had to be handmade. His mother used to tell him, "Walk straight, speak politely, and don't give them a reason." Elijah never asked who them were. He already knew. Them were the people who crossed the street when they saw him coming. Them were the store clerks who watched him more closely than the security cameras. Them were the teachers who expected trouble from him before expecting talent. At school, Elijah learned to sit still not because he was calm, but because movement felt risky. A raised hand could be mistaken for defiance. A laugh could be labeled disruption. Once, when a fight broke out 2 rows behind him, the teacher's eyes snapped to Elijah first. He hadn't moved. He hadn't spoken. Still, his name was written on the board under detention. He didn't argue. Arguing never helped. Silence, he learned, was safer. On the playground, other kids played freely, shouting and chasing dreams as if the world welcomed them. Elijah played smaller. He measured his joy, trimmed it down so it wouldn't look threatening. When the ball rolled into his hands, he passed it quickly. When he won a race, he slowed down near the end. Being exceptional felt dangerous. Being invisible felt survivable. At home, mirrors told him a different story. His skin was rich, deep, like the earth after rain. His eyes carried stories older than the streets he walked. His mother would cup his face and say, "You are beautiful. Don't let them steal that from you." But the world was persuasive, and it spoke louder than love sometimes. Elijah wanted to believe her, but belief is fragile when it's constantly under attack. As he grew older, the rules multiplied. Don't wear your hoodie up. Don't walk too fast. Don't walk too slow. Keep your hands visible. Smile but not too much. Confidence could be mistaken for arrogance. Silence could be mistaken for guilt. There was no correct way to exist, only ways to minimize harm. Elijah carried these rules like invisible weights, shaping how he stood, how he breathed, how he lived. One afternoon, on his way home from school, a police car slowed beside him. The window rolled down. Questions followed: where are you going, where do you live, why are you here? Elijah answered calmly, respectfully, just like his mother taught him. Still, the officer's hand hovered near his belt. The moment passed, but the feeling stayed. Fear didn't leave when the car did. It settled into Elijah's chest and unpacked its bags. That night, Elijah lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what crime his skin had committed. He thought about how tired he was, not from running, not from working, but from being careful. The world demanded caution from him in places where others felt free. It asked him to earn safety that was freely given to others. Yet despite everything, something inside Elijah refused to harden. He loved music, songs that spoke of struggle and survival. He loved writing words he never said out loud, filling notebooks with thoughts too heavy for conversation. In those pages, he was allowed to be angry. Allowed to be hurt. Allowed to be human. His pen became a quiet rebellion against a world that tried to define him in one cruel color. Sometimes, late at night, Elijah imagined a different future. One where his presence didn't raise suspicion. One where his skin was just skin, not a warning, not a weapon, not a sentence. He imagined being seen fully, honestly, without fear wrapping itself around every interaction. Those dreams were small, fragile, but they were his. Elijah didn't yet know how hard the world would try to break him. He didn't know about the night waiting ahead, lurking under a street light with clenched fists and unasked questions. All he knew was that every day, he survived being misunderstood. And even then quietly, stubbornly his spirit kept breathing. Because while the world saw his color first, Elijah was more than what they saw. And deep inside him, a strength was growing, one born not from hatred, but from endurance. The night began like any other, ordinary, unremarkable, harmless. That was what made it dangerous. Elijah left the late shift just after 10, the air cool enough to sting his lungs. Street lights flickered overhead, casting long, trembling shadows that stretched and shrank as he walked. He followed the same route he always did, hands in his pockets, head slightly lowered, not in shame, but in habit. Survival had taught him posture. His phone buzzed with a message from his mother. "Did you eat?" Elijah smiled faintly and typed back, "On my way home." That small lie felt safer than telling her he was tired beyond words. Halfway down Birch Avenue, he felt it, the shift in the air, the tightening of something unseen. A car slowed behind him. Tires whispered against the asphalt. Elijah's shoulders stiffened, but he didn't turn around. Turning around sometimes invited trouble. He kept walking, counting steps, pretending the world was still kind. The car stopped. A door slammed shut. Hey. You. Stop." The voice was sharp, impatient. Elijah froze for half a second, long enough for fear to bloom, then turned slowly, hands visible, heart pounding so loudly he was sure they could hear it. 3 men stood under the streetlight. Their faces were half lit, half hidden, as if even the light couldn't decide whether to expose them fully. "What's going on?" Elijah asked calmly. Calm was another rule. "You live around here," one of them said, stepping closer. "Yes," Elijah replied. "I'm just going home from work." They didn't hear the word work. They heard excuse. "Empty your pockets," another voice demanded. Elijah's stomach dropped. Why? The question landed wrong. The answer came fast, a shove to his chest, hard enough to knock the air out of him. His back hit the brick wall behind him, pain exploding across his shoulders. "You don't ask questions," the man growled. "People like you always got something to hide. People like you." The words cut deeper than the shove. Elijah raised his hands higher. "Please. I didn't do anything." The street light hummed above them, indifferent. No one else was around. Windows were dark. Doors were closed. The world had turned its back. The first punch came from the side, catching his jaw. Stars burst behind his eyes. He tasted blood, immediately metallic, warm. He staggered, trying to stay upright, trying to stay conscious. His thoughts scattered. "Don't fall. Don't give them that." But they kept coming. Fists. Boots. Elbows. Each blow carried something heavier than pain: assumptions, hatred, permission. They weren't just hitting his body, they were punishing an idea of him they'd already decided was guilty. Elijah curled inward, arms over his head, the concrete scraping his skin as he fell. "Teach him a lesson," someone said. A lesson for what? Existing. He wanted to scream, to beg, to explain, but nothing came out. Breath became a stranger. Time lost its shape. The night blurred into fragments: laughter, a crack of bone, the sharp pain in his ribs, the sky spinning when his head hit the ground. Then, suddenly, it stopped. Footsteps retreated. A car engine roared. Silence rushed back in, heavy and cruel. Elijah lay there, shaking. His body felt broken in places he couldn't name. He tried to move his fingers. They responded slowly. Relief washed over him, followed by anger. He was alive. That felt like an unreasonable victory. The street light flickered again, as if ashamed. Tears slid from Elijah's eyes, not loud, not dramatic just there. He wasn't crying from pain alone. He cried because he'd done everything right. He followed the rules. He was careful. He was polite. And still, the world had decided he was disposable. A passerby eventually found him and called for help. Sirens cut through the night, red and blue lights painting his body in cruel colors. As paramedics lifted him onto the stretcher, someone asked, "What happened?" Elijah opened his mouth. Nothing came out. How do you explain being beaten for something you can't remove? How do you explain a crime where the weapon was your skin? As the ambulance doors closed, Elijah stared at the ceiling, each bump in the road sending fresh waves of pain through him. He thought of his mother. He thought of the rules he followed so faithfully. He thought of how small his dreams suddenly felt. That night didn't just bruise Elijah's body. It rewrote his understanding of the world. And as the sirens wailed, carrying him away from the street where his innocence had been left bleeding, something inside him cracked quietly, deeply setting the stage for a battle he never asked to fight. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and quiet despair. The walls were pale, unyielding, like the world itself, and the fluorescent lights hummed an incessant reminder that life went on even when it hurt too much to breathe. Elijah lay in a stiff hospital bed, his body a map of pain. Bruises bloomed across his skin in angry purples and blues, his ribs ached with every shallow breath. Yet, even as his body healed, he felt something far heavier pressing on his chest, a weight no medicine could touch. He hadn't spoken much since the night of the attack. Words felt useless, fragile, incapable of carrying the truth of what had happened. "It's just a fight," people said. It could have been worse. Their attempts at comfort sounded hollow, like someone trying to cover a wound with paper. They didn't understand that the real wound wasn't on his body, it was the realization that the world could turn so cruelly on someone for nothing more than skin. Nurses came and went. They asked if he was comfortable, if he needed water, if he wanted painkillers. Their words were kind, but they didn't reach the part of him that trembled with fear and disbelief. He stared at the ceiling, counting tiles, imagining cracks in the plaster that matched the cracks he felt inside. Every sound, the distant beep of a heart monitor, the rustle of sheets, the soft footsteps in the corridor reminded him how fragile he had become. Visitors came, too. His mother, her hands trembling as she held his, tried to speak words of hope. "You're safe now," she whispered. "It's over." Elijah wanted to believe her. He wanted desperately to believe her, but the fear had seeped too deep. The world had proven itself to be unpredictable and violent, and he didn't know how to trust again, not in strangers, not in himself. Even at school, after he returned, Elijah noticed the way people's eyes lingered, too long, too curious. Whispers followed him through the halls. Teachers asked if he was all right, but no one asked why. He felt invisible, yet hypervisible at the same time, a walking contradiction. It was exhausting. He spoke less, laughed less, even avoided the sports he once loved. The world had taught him that his presence alone could be dangerous, and he absorbed the lesson with quiet, aching precision. He stopped confiding in friends. His notebooks, once filled with dreams, became blank pages. Writing didn't soothe him anymore, it reminded him of a past innocence that the night had stolen. He replayed the event in his mind, over and over, each replay twisting into new horrors, each imagining making him smaller, quieter, less. Sleep became a rare visitor. Nightmares came instead, shadows of fists, faceless attackers, street lights flickering like judgment. The silence he cultivated wasn't just about avoiding pain, it was about survival. He learned to speak minimally, move minimally, exist minimally. Even his laughter felt dangerous, a sound that could draw attention, could provoke. He became careful in a way that no child should have to be careful, and he hated himself for needing that caution. Yet beneath the fear, beneath the bruises and the silence, a quiet defiance lingered. It was fragile, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Sometimes, when no one was watching, he would tap the edge of his notebook, thinking about words that hadn't yet been written. Sometimes, late at night, he would hum old songs he used to love, melodies that reminded him that there had been color and warmth in the world before it had turned so cruel. It wasn't hope, at least, not yet, but it was a seed, small and persistent, waiting for a moment to grow. Elijah began noticing how much the world tried to shape him without permission. Every glance, every whisper, every unasked question reinforced a lesson: you must shrink to survive. You must hide to be safe. But there was another lesson, one he hadn't fully embraced: survival is not surrender. He didn't know it then, but these weeks of silence, of retreat, were shaping him. He was learning to measure the cruelty of the world without letting it extinguish the spark inside him. His body had been beaten, but the mind, even in its brokenness, still had choices. He could sink into despair, or he could wait, quietly, for a reason to rise. For now, he waited. And in that waiting, in the painful quiet that filled every corner of his life, Elijah began the slow, almost imperceptible work of rebuilding something stronger than fear. He didn't speak it aloud. He didn't write it down. He didn't even fully understand it himself. But deep inside, the seed of resilience had been planted, nourished by the very violence meant to destroy him. It was in the silence after the storm that Elijah began to understand a truth that would guide him through the darkest nights ahead: the world could break him in body, but it could not claim his spirit unless he allowed it. And at that moment, lying in the dim hospital light, he decided silently, stubbornly, that he would not allow it. The world had tried to break Elijah, and for a time, it seemed to have succeeded. But change rarely arrives like a thunderclap. It comes quietly, in fragments, in whispers, in small acts that refuse to be ignored. For Elijah, the first whisper came from an old man at the bus stop one chilly morning. His coat was worn, his hands gnarled like tree roots, and his eyes held the kind of patience that only comes from surviving storms of your own. "You all right, son?" the man asked, not with pity, but with curiosity, a kind that pierced through Elijah's armor. Elijah hesitated. He wanted to say no, to admit everything, but the words felt heavy, dangerous. Instead, he nodded, barely. "You don't have to carry it alone," the man said simply, sitting beside him. "Sometimes, telling someone what happened is the first step toward walking again." That day, Elijah didn't speak much more than the usual greetings. But he carried the words with him like a fragile lantern, illuminating corners of his heart that had been in darkness. Over the next few weeks, he began noticing other small sparks. A book left in the library that spoke of resilience. A teacher who actually listened when he tried to explain an essay idea. A neighbor who smiled without suspicion. These weren't grand gestures, but they reminded him that not every interaction with the world was a trap. The real turning point came one rainy evening when he returned home and found his notebooks scattered across his desk. They had been untouched since the night of the attack. On a whim, he opened one and began writing, not about the night itself, not yet, but about what he felt: the anger, the fear, the unfairness, and the strange, stubborn flicker of hope he refused to let die. The pen moved fast, almost frantically, as if it were catching up to all the words that had been trapped inside him for weeks. Writing became his first act of rebellion, not loud, not public, not confrontational, but profound. Through the words, he realized something he hadn't allowed himself to admit: he could survive the world without letting it define him. The violence had marked him, yes, but it had not marked his mind. The fear had entered his body, yes, but it had not chained his spirit. Slowly, cautiously, Elijah began speaking again. At first, it was whispers to his mother, hesitant conversations that ended in long silences. Then he spoke to his friends, telling them what he could manage. Every word was a small victory. Every time he said, "I am not afraid," Even if he trembled inside, the world's power over him shrank just a little. He realized, too, that survival was not enough. Living quietly in the shadows would protect him, perhaps, but it would not honor who he truly was. And so he made a choice, not one of revenge, not one of anger, but one of visibility. He chose to exist fully, to claim space even when the world would rather he disappear. School became a proving ground for this decision. Elijah spoke up in class, offered answers even when he worried about being judged, and slowly discovered that his voice mattered. Teachers noticed, yes, but more importantly, he noticed the difference in himself. Confidence wasn't arrogance. Speaking wasn't danger. Being himself wasn't a crime. He also began noticing how power worked, not the kind enforced with fists, but the kind that came from understanding, from truth, from resilience. He volunteered at local community programs, spoke at youth gatherings, and even began mentoring younger kids who, like him, felt invisible in a world that judged too quickly. Every time he helped someone else reclaim their dignity, Elijah felt a little of his own return. And yet, there were setbacks. Fear never completely disappeared. Some nights, he would wake drenched in sweat, reliving the streetlight, the shouts, the blows. But now he could face those memories without being swallowed by them. He could acknowledge the terror and then set it aside, like stones he no longer needed to carry. In time, Elijah began sharing his story publicly. Small groups at first, then larger gatherings. People listened, not because they wanted to witness his pain, but because they recognized the courage it took to speak despite it. And with every retelling, he reclaimed a piece of himself that the night had tried to steal. One afternoon, as he sat in the library surrounded by notebooks and books and quiet determination, Elijah finally whispered to himself what he had been too afraid to say for so long: I am more than what they tried to make me. I am alive. I am strong. I am seen. It wasn't the end of his struggle. The world remained cruel, unpredictable, and often unjust. But Elijah had discovered something deeper: the power to rise wasn't given by the world, it was claimed by him. And once claimed, no one could take it away. Years had passed since that night under the flickering streetlight, yet the memory never faded. It lingered in Elijah's bones, in the careful way he measured his steps, in the faint tension that sometimes gripped his chest when a car slowed behind him. But the fear that had once defined him no longer ruled his life. It had been tempered by endurance, shaped into something stronger, a resolve that refused to be broken. Elijah now stood before a crowd in a modest community hall. The room was full of young faces, some tentative, some bright with curiosity. They had heard whispers of his story, but now they were here, listening to him speak, waiting for the lessons he had learned in silence and suffering. For the first time, he felt the strange thrill of power, not the power to harm, not the power to dominate, but the power to inspire, to bear witness, to reclaim space that had once been denied to him. He began quietly, his voice steady but soft. Words flowed from him, recounting moments of fear, pain, and isolation, but also moments of small victories: an old man at a bus stop, a teacher who listened, a pen that moved across blank pages when the world had tried to silence him. Each story was an offering, a bridge connecting his pain to the hope of those who would hear him. And yes, he said, pausing to let it sink in, the world will try to define you by what you cannot control. It will see your color before it sees your heart. It will judge you before it knows you. But here's the truth: their judgment does not define you. Your spirit does. The crowd listened, rapt, some nodding, others wiping tears quietly. Elijah's words were not just a testimony, they were a declaration. The violence, the hatred, the nights of terror and silence, they had tried to reduce him to a number, a stereotype, a shadow. But he had refused. He had survived. He had grown. And now, standing tall, he embodied the resilience that no one could steal. When he finished, there was silence. Then, applause not loud, not exaggerated, but sincere and steady. Elijah's chest swelled, not with pride, but with recognition. This was proof that pain could be transformed into purpose, that suffering could be shaped into action. He realized that the fight wasn't about erasing the past, but about claiming the present. After the speech, a young boy approached him. Dark skin, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and admiration. I get picked on at school, the boy said, voice trembling. People, they hate me for how I look. Elijah knelt down, placing a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. I know, he said softly. I've been there. And I know it hurts. But listen carefully, you cannot control what the world thinks about you. You can only control how you treat yourself, how you carry yourself, and the choices you make to rise above. You are more than their cruelty. You are unbreakable. The boy's eyes glimmered with something new, possibility. Hope. Elijah smiled, realizing that this was the true power of survival, not just to live, but to illuminate a path for others. Outside the hall, the sun was setting, casting gold and crimson across the sky. Elijah walked home slowly, feeling the warmth on his skin. He thought of the night that had once broken him, of the concrete that had cut into his body, of the shadows that had whispered threats. And he realized something profound: those nights had not destroyed him, they had shaped him. Every bruise, every scar, every tear had been a teacher, forging a strength he had never known he possessed. At home, his mother greeted him with her usual warmth. How was it? She asked. I spoke, he said simply. And people listened. Her eyes glistened. You always had a voice, she replied. You just had to find it? Elijah nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle in his chest. He had found it, yes. And now, he understood that finding his voice was not an endpoint, it was a lifelong practice, a promise to himself that no darkness, no hatred, no ignorance would ever again define him. As night fell, he looked out the window, city lights twinkling like scattered stars. The world remained harsh and unjust in many ways. But Elijah had discovered something unassailable, the power within himself to stand tall, to speak, to act, to live fully. He had been beaten for his skin, broken by the world, but his spirit had refused to die. And now, it shone brighter than ever. He whispered quietly, almost to himself, I am unbroken. I will rise. And I will not be silent again. And in that moment, Elijah understood a truth few ever do: survival is not the same as surrender. To survive is to endure. To rise after enduring is to be unstoppable. And Elijah, finally free from the weight of fear, had become exactly that: unbroken, unshakable, and undeniably alive.